who've read the book knows I feature James highly in the book, in my section on Vancouver, and I've been a fan for many years, and I put that in both to remind us of what an incredibly important role architecture can play in improving the quality of life, improving the sense of a city, but also because something that I really wanted to ask you about, which is the ability of architecture to illustrate the chains of ideas. And I tell a story earlier in the book about the creation of the skyscraper in Chicago, but I think the story of you and Arthur Erickson and Vancouverism and how it's developed seems to be just as much of a wonderful example of innovation moving from one person to another in densities. And I wondered if you might educate, enlighten us a little bit more about how your influences work and how you saw that cluster of genius operating.
Well, I think it's very interesting you use Brunelleschi perspective as an introduction. I think if we look back at Erickson, he didn't exist on his own. He was part of a group of thinkers, early thinkers, that brought modernism to Vancouver. Part of B.C. Binning, Ron Thom, many of these people all shared those ideas, and Arthur was part of that group. And through Arthur, through his offices, there are people like, many people that work for him, like Bing Tom, myself, and Barry Downs in other cities, and many, many former employees, like Nick Milkovich. We all share a certain feeling about the city. And I think there's a reason why we all came to Vancouver, is because first, I think we like the natural climate. We like your January weather in Vancouver. And because of that, I think it's easy for us to grow with a Vancouver vision. I'm embarrassed. People say I'm sort of help with Vancouverism. I'm just reflecting an attitude that people working in this city developed throughout the years. And many directors of planning, like Ray Spaxman, Larry Beasley, all contributed to that, to our understanding what urbanism is all about. That is special to Vancouver. That is different than Dubai. And I think that's a very important thing, that when we do work, I look at my colleagues' work, they look at my work, and we learn from each other. And I think that proximity is very important.
It's wonderful how, in fact, one of the most famous examples of supposedly the lone genius in architecture is Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead, whereas, in fact, every story I've ever heard about architecture suggests exactly the opposite. The genius does not come from Gary Cooper standing alone, but from someone who is in the midst of a maelstrom, and obviously it's the same thing.
And Arthur is the best example. He traveled the world. He knows culture. I remember working for him as a young student. He would come back from Iran. He's the first one to go into China. Everybody knows his love for Japan. And everything influenced him. And I think he's a master at assimilating early information without internet.
Right. Would you mind we talked a little bit about the barriers to density, and you've certainly been on the front lines of trying to get projects through and facing community opposition in some cases. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you think are the challenges that are facing Vancouver in this area? And is the city, open to the change that it may need?
Well, of course, the challenges we face as architects are more technical, but actually I like to turn the question around to you, because when you talk about the city, how they grow and how they achieve the status, you call Tokyo Imperial City, you have smart cities, you have growing cities, you have well-managed cities, and you call Vancouver a consumer city. Now, as a city, we are very aware of this reputation. Now, people take it differently. Some people call us a resort city. People don't really live here. It's unaffordable. We control our supply of land. So I'd like you to first clarify for us, what do you mean by consumer city that Vancouver is?
So I meant something different than resort city, meaning sort of if we take a resort city to being a city that exists primarily for people who earn their money elsewhere to come and enjoy life. That is not at all what I had in mind in terms of using the word consumer city. I meant a city that is, people come there above all because they actually want to live there, not just because they see economic opportunity there. But that, of course, then the city thrives because those people then create their own economic opportunities. I often say the best local economic development strategy is to attract and train smart people and then more or less get out of their way. But that's not a recipe for laissez-faire, because attracting and training smart people is enormously hard. It requires making sure the streets move swiftly and the housing is affordable and the streets are safe, all of which are difficult jobs. But the age of the consumer city is on us, right? Cities no longer enjoy an innate advantage because of proximity to coal mines. They all have to compete for mobile labor. But if the consumer cities become solely resort cities, that's not a recipe for long-run economic sustainability. It needs to combine entrepreneurship with quality of life.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that the City of Vancouver, we have a very unique system of permitting. We have a discretionary system where every major project in downtown, there's no guarantee. You have to appear in front of a peer panel of urban designers to critique it. And they also have city policies. But at the same time, we're open to innovation. So if you want to do a super tall building or something like this architect, Bianchi Engel from Copenhagen is proposing in Vancouver, we will listen and the whole city will participate in the discussion. And I think that's very, very healthy. It may take longer than we like, always, but I think it is where Vancouver is sort of a turning point. I think, or a crossroad, I should say, that we're looking to the future. We're trying to figure out what else to do. We've done what we've done the last 20 years. So what else can we do now as a city? And I think that is a question that I think a lot of us are all thinking about.
What are, as you do work throughout the world, what are the cities that you think are generating things that Vancouver can learn from? Where do you see things that are particularly exciting and smart that places are doing?
Oh boy. I think every city has something to offer.
That's a true diplomat's answer.
Well, but like you, for example, Singapore is a well-managed city.
Absolutely.
But it stifles certain kind of creativity. If you say Boston is a smart city, yes, but Boston has its own problems, issues with commercialism and consumer stuff.
And it's
right?
particularly as a problem in terms of, I mean, Boston is very comparable population and acreage-wise to Vancouver and permits about 1/3 as many housing units each year. I mean, it's a much more difficult city to change than Vancouver.
But every city you talked about, we can learn from.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that I can say about Vancouver is our quality of life. That probably I would put higher than anywhere else I've traveled, that I've seen all over the world.
It's astonishing. And of course, the international character of the place. I mean, it is which you are a living example of, right? I mean, the fact that Vancouver is, able to attract talent from the east that, has helped transform the city.
I think for those of us that live in Vancouver, I think there's a lot of complaint that all our building looks the same, we use the same materials, and we are. I think in terms of, special quality, I personally would say we don't have a lot of grade A, capital A architecture building in Vancouver. Even Calgary get the Bowl and the Calatrava and so on. Now, I'm not advocating we bring those names here, but because of our emphasis on public realm and the general quality of architecture, we tend to go for the best average rather than the peak. And this was something I actually asked Ray Spexman as a young architect when he was first proposing the urban design panel system. And I said, wouldn't that limit the creativity of the real brilliant people? And he says, yeah, that's something I would accept because he wants the best we could achieve as a city rather than one or two examples of great architecture. So I think that debate is still on today.
Yeah. And often it's so hard because, in fact, things that are admired as great architecture can also be things that are deeply detested by the actual users. Boston City Hall being something that I'm intimately aware of, which is a landmark piece of brutalist architecture, and yet it is loathed by every worker who goes there that I have yet met. And it's an enormously difficult challenge between aesthetics and livability in terms of the space.
And I think whenever you push the boundary, that's bound to happen.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And in some sense, the design panel keeps it relatively safe. Yeah.
Gentlemen, thank you. That was a pleasure. I'd love to carry on for a couple of hours if you don't mind, but maybe I thank you very much for sharing this. It was a pleasure for me to see you both on the stage together and finally meeting each other and being able to talk. Thank you.